our last presenter, and welcome to the Guilties, the award show for Holocaust films made by white Gentiles. And the next nominees are...
There are a lot of Holocaust movies, like a lot. It's basically its own subgenre at this point. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't have a problem with movies about genocide. For example, Rabbit Proof Fence is how I was introduced to the concept of colonialism. Hotel Rwanda is an amazing film that conveys the bravery of individuals against those who might kill their friends and neighbors. These movies are incredibly moving, well-made examples of human tragedy depicted on film. I, as an outsider to the cultures depicted in these films, feel sympathetic to their plight and horrified by what was done to them. There are some Holocaust movies that do things right. It's a cliche, and I'm sure you know what I'm gonna say. The X-Men. This movie portrays the Holocaust very briefly as part of one of the characters' backstories, without indulging in tragedy porn. And that character's life is shaped by the Holocaust, which is more fully explored in the X-Men comics. When Jews make Holocaust movies, they're usually pretty good, even when they're about righteous Gentiles, otherwise known as the righteous among nations. But most of the time, Holocaust movies are made by non-Jews and focus on non-Jewish people. And that's kind of a big problem, as you may have guessed. There's absolutely nothing wrong with telling stories about these people. They were heroes, and they deserve to be celebrated for the lives they saved. But why are there so many movies made about them? A high percentage of the movies that are made about the Holocaust are made by non-Jewish white people, and a high percentage of these movies also focus on righteous Gentiles, as opposed to the actual victims of the Holocaust, which include but are not limited to Jewish people, the Romani people, LGBTQ people, and people with disabilities, both cognitive and physical. So why is this a thing? It's not like most Holocaust survivors are silent about the horrors they had to endure. There are a lot of survivors who have bravely told their stories, many of whom are still alive today. I'm sure at least one of them would love to sell their life rights and leave a legacy for their family. I personally don't know of any of my family who were killed in the Holocaust, but it's a universal part of the Jewish experience to connect to Holocaust narratives. So why is so much money put into making these movies about non-Jewish people? Most people are not Jewish. In fact, only 0.2% of the general population, or 14 million people in the world, are Jewish. That's not a lot. Most people who are Jewish either live in the US or Israel. So there are a lot of people who have never met a Jewish person before. Most people, when given the option, would say they are not Nazis. Most would define themselves in opposition to Nazi ideology, which I think we all agree is for the best. But we can't say the same people are the best at identifying anti-Semitism, especially the subtle anti-Semitism that's often seen in these righteous Gentile films. When making entertainment, producers want to appeal to the average viewer. In their mind, at least up until recently, the average viewer is a white man. Now, we can generously say that they consider the average viewer to be white, Christian, heterosexual, and cisgender. Yay, progress! So, when making a movie about the Second World War, what kind of character is easiest to empathize with? A non-Jewish white person who doesn't like Nazis and makes sacrifices to protect people? Or a Jewish person who is being persecuted because of perceived inferiority and strange customs? It is less work to put yourself in the shoes of someone like you. And it feels good, doesn't it? To imagine yourself as the protagonist, someone who would shoot Nazis if given the option. People want to believe that if Nazis were still around, they'd be fighting them with all they got. Well... Where the fuck are those people now? People want to see themselves as heroes, not really thinking about the victims. They want the glory of punching Hitler in the face. They don't want to actually do the hard work. This framing of the Holocaust as not a story about Jewish trauma, but a story about white excellence and the triumph of the human spirit, fails to center Jewish people in narratives that are about us, and puts righteous Gentiles in the position of hero, casting Jews as only passive victims. In reality, many Jews fought the Nazis and were killed. There were a number of riots in the camps. Plenty of Jews fought back and even escaped the camps. But these stories don't get told often in Holocaust movies, and these could be amazing films. There's this myth that Jewish people went quietly to their deaths, but the reality is that many of them fought and died, and there are many heroic Jews we could lionize in the media. The Jewish Brigade Group was the only military unit to serve in World War II and in all the Allied forces as an independent national Jewish military formation. Modelstein, a violin prodigy, spied on Nazi soldiers and smuggled dynamite in his instrument case. He eventually was able to blow up the restaurant where he played for Nazi officers and killed an unknown number. He was 13 years old. Model did not survive the war. He was killed only a year later at the age of 14. Zivia Lebetkin founded a resistance organization in her native Poland. She mentored youths and smuggled teenagers out of the country. Zivia and her comrades agreed together to not escape the ghetto until they could save as many children as possible. She did survive, and she testified at the Eichmann trial. These are just a few examples. There are many more. And even if all Jews had gone peacefully to their deaths, making those deaths and their stories about white people being heroes still wouldn't be the best take. Another reason for the popularity of movies about the Holocaust and World War II is that Nazis make an excellent enemy. Up until recently, most people thought that Nazis were bad. Unfortunately, that isn't really the case anymore, but it's still really easy to define your villain if they're a Nazi or Nazi adjacent. There are lots of symbols and shorthand ways you can show a person's allegiance. Is this person a Nazi? Then they're bad. Is this person resisting the Nazis? Then they must be good. Nazis are always bad, until or if they're redeemed. But that usually doesn't happen in film. Literature is a different beast, but that's a video for another time. Having an unambiguous enemy is useful because you can entirely dehumanize them. Villains you can sympathize with are too complicated for some stories and some audiences. So having a villain who's so terrible that they're beyond redemption is useful. Nobody feels bad if you shoot a Nazi in the head. And that's an attitude I feel like we can keep. If you have the chance to punch a Nazi, punch him. While videos of American soldiers liberating the camps are powerful and all that, they have to be put into context. That context being that many, many Jews died because a lot of countries, including America, did not want to accept them. There was a time before the Holocaust when Jews were able and encouraged to leave Germany and go to more friendly shores. A lot of people saw the warning and fled. This is when my family immigrated to the Americas, but many other families weren't as lucky. In a world where the West accepted Jewish refugees or even encouraged them, there would have been a lot less dead people and a lot more Jews. I personally believe that these movies are helpful for white people because they are the heroes. They need this stuff simplified sometimes. Hey, it's better than having them hate us. While the US did not enter the Second World War until after an Axis power, Japan directly attacked American soil, it's nice to pretend that the US entered the war to liberate the Jews and save the day. But that's far from true. It is a helpful fantasy, although difficult to maintain these days, considering that the United States continues to refuse refugees and is responsible for the creation of camps holding children in terrible conditions. And why, you might ask, are these people trying to escape gangs, poverty, persecution, and violence truly any different than European Jews were? This brings us back to Oscar bait and why the Holocaust is exploited for awards. Much like in the newspaper business, if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, tragedy sells. I wish I could tell you that these movies are made because people want to raise awareness of the Holocaust or the war crimes perpetrated by Nazis. But no, it's because tragedy gets you Oscars. The more pointless the death, the better. For some context, people complain about how the saturation of Marvel movies and superheroes are ruining pop culture. But for every year since the Holocaust, there have been 3 movies about it. Since 2008, there have been 1.8 Marvel movies per year. From 1945 to 2000, 242 Holocaust feature films have been produced worldwide, of which 44 have been nominated for 150 Oscars. In fact, of the 64 American-produced Holocaust-related feature films made, 21 have won or been nominated for at least 1 Oscar, a 32% hit rate. Those 21 films were nominated for 109 awards. So, are Holocaust movies just that much better than all other films? Many of them are pretty well made, but that's not the reason why they win all the awards. Rather than those movies being better than other films, studios want to capitalize on tragedy, and the Holocaust is the perfect tragedy for them to do it. Rarely is there such an unambiguous bad guy, and it means the US, or the white man, gets to play the hero. I don't necessarily think that movies about the Holocaust have to be serious, good representation TM. Jojo Rabbit, for example, is a more comedic take on Third Reich Germany. But the film was written by Jewish writer, director, and actor Taika Waititi. It also has a unique lens of showing the war from the perspective of a child who has been fully indoctrinated into Nazi ideology. And the Jewish people of the film are humanized. full characters. Inglourious Basterds, on the other hand, is one of the movies that might not pass the smell test if you're watching it as a Jewish person. It's a revenge fantasy, pure and simple. While the narrative contains Jewish characters, it's more a celebration of gratuitous violence against Nazis. Notably, this film was directed by the non-Jewish Quentin Tarantino. The film was pretty much entirely panned by the Jewish press, though many other critics had a high opinion of it. The issues with this film could fill a whole video. A film that is nearly pure unadulterated Oscar bait is The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and in a lot of ways, it's actually a parallel film to Jojo Rabbit. Based on the 2006 novel by Irish writer John Boyne, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is about a German family and centers on a young boy named Bruno. His father's a Nazi officer and they live adjacent to Auschwitz. Bruno befriends Shmuel, a prisoner in the camp who is his age. This film has been criticized by a lot of experts for inaccuracies about the Holocaust, but also for portraying the average German family as ignorant about what was happening in their country. Both the book and the film end with Shmuel and Bruno being gassed, ultimately Bruno sacrificing himself rather than leaving his friend. While Jojo Rabbit has a very different tone, it is ultimately a coming-of-age story about a young German boy finding out the world is different and more horrible than he imagined. Unfortunately, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is a self-indulgent tragedy about the power of friendship that is mostly about Germans and not Jews. The movie's crux is how virtuous and innocent Bruno is, and I don't think it's a coincidence that neither the author of the original novel nor the writer-director of the movie are Jewish. Now, I'm not saying that only Jews can participate in the creation of art about Jews, but I am saying that narratives about the Holocaust should not center the voices of people who are not its victims. Out of the aforementioned 242 films, 2 are about Romani victims of the Nazis. I was able to find 1 movie about the Nazi murder of gay people, and I could not find any fictional media about the murder of people with disabilities. While the stories of righteous Gentiles are important, they are not the story of the Holocaust. They are uplifting, a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the drive to do good and protect others. But the story and legacy of the Holocaust is blood and ashes. When films center the heroism of bystanders, they do a disservice to the victims, most of whom will never be honored.